Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, March 17th, 2025, and today we're going to talk three sisters-Slash-Milpa gardening, discuss what we've been up to on our farm through this tiny warm spell, and why we stopped growing microgreens. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Monday, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice weekend. We had rain, like a lot of it. It rained hard for about 15 hours in our area, and then it rained even harder for a little while. Luckily, it was a little dry and not soaking wet going into it, so I think the soil handled it better this time than it did when we got rain that was like last month when we had all that flooding. But hoo boy, it may be one of those kind of years. Also, totally related, yesterday was Selection Sunday for the brackets, so the No-Till Growers Bracket Challenge is officially live. Go Cats. Link will be in the show notes. I'll send the winner a signed book that admits my defeat or something. But if you are even mildly interested or in either beating me or in playing a bracket challenge, go check that out. Link is in the show notes. And another thing, the final episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast went up today on our podcast feed. I will link that in the show notes, like all the things. But basically, this is the show that I started back in 2018. And for that final episode, I sat down with Mimi Castile, Alex Ball, and Natalie Lounsbury to discuss what that experience, being in the hosting chair, has been like for them. And just the state of farming, as seen from that perspective, from somebody who's calling farmers and talking to them for an hour plus. So huge thanks to all of them, and to Michael Sellis and Jackson Roulette and the rest of the team that helped make that show possible over the 7-8 years, however long it was going on. Anyway, give that episode a listen. It's a good glimpse into the interviewer side of things, and I share some insights about what this daily show has been like to produce as well. Today, I thought we would give a little bit of a rundown of what all I've been up to beyond just tiny sunburns in our tiny heat spell on the farm right now in mid-March. Again, what I am doing here in Kentucky, Zone 6B, is not necessarily what you should be doing there in insert region and hardiness zone. So if you're in a colder climate, you probably have a week or 4 to wait, to have to worry about any of these things. In a hotter climate, you should probably already be doing some of these things if you want to beat the season at all. So it's all very contextual, but maybe you can get some insight just listening to what I'm doing. So last week was when the field stuff really started, not just because we have nice weather, but because mid-March is my typical start time in the field, especially for sowing stuff, not necessarily for transplanting stuff. The exception to that is onions. I do transplant those in March, but most everything else I sort of just hold off on. I could get away with transplanting spinach and lettuce if I cover the lettuce, but my issue for me in my climate with spinach is that the early transplants often bolt quickly, so I prefer to sow it in March instead of transplant it. Radishes, arugula, and turnips, when I grow turnips, those are all the same thing. I like sowing those around now. So the first round of carrots and beets last week, I don't rush the germination on those or cover them for fear of hard frost killing them off or forcing them to bolt. I prefer those to just germinate slowly. For the potatoes, remember that I'm trialing potatoes from sprouts and comparing them to our regular potato starting method, which I have detailed in video form before. Link in the show notes, like all the things. What's weird about this trial, beyond not being super scientific, honestly, because we are a production farm with no research budget, is when to plant the chunks of potatoes versus the potato slips. Like, if I start the slips, the little sprouts that I'm planting, before planting the potato chunks, would that be a more fair comparison than starting the chunks of potatoes at the same time as I start the slips in the greenhouse? Does that make sense? In other words, what is the better comparison? Starting the potato slips at the same time as the potato chunks, or starting the potato slips as soon as I have them, and then starting the potato chunks as soon as the ground is ready? I'm not sure. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of both. For the main crop, though, I just put the chunks of the potatoes in the ground at the same time that I started sprouting the trays of potatoes. My working theory based on the results last year is that the potatoes that I started from chunks of potatoes in the ground will produce more yield, but also have more cosmetic issues. The potatoes that I start from sprouts will be smaller, but more marketable overall. So my goal is to see if I can get the sprouts to grow bigger potatoes by burying them deeper and doing a gradual hilling process. Luckily, I will get to try several different things with those sprouts because they will continue sending up sprouts all season long. Each 10 by 20 tray will probably generate, 50 to 100 slips or more in the season. That's kind of the genius of it. You can get mini successions off of a significantly smaller portion of potatoes. Anyway, I've done an episode kind of explaining that trial, which you can go back and check out. Also, surprise, linked in the show notes. But yes, for the normal potato approach, I did the normal potato thing. Dug a furrow, stepped the potatoes into the soil about 8 inches or so, and about a foot apart. Added some compost and then sprinkled some of the Jadon microorganism solution over top and then buried them. That's what I've done for years. It's been great. I've seen like 5 potato beetles in 3 or 4 years. So that's been a really effective approach. Nothing super complicated there. I usually also add the tarp back over top to warm the soil and help with any weed seeds, but it was so warm I have not done that yet. I may actually do that this week though, with the weather kind of dipping. And then if I do add the tarp, I will check in about a week to make sure there are no sprouts yet. I think last year the tarp was on for like 2 weeks. And then I took it off and just kind of let them come into weed-free beds. I mentioned not transplanting much spinach in the spring just because of fear of bolting, but I sowed a bed of spinach as well, which is a crop I like to go hard at in the spring because once it is done for the summer, it's done. It is not, unlike lettuce, one I've been able to really convince to go past June very much. It usually just wants to yellow and die, regardless of nitrogen or anything else. It's just like, no, I'm good. There are, of course, spinach alternatives out there that work okay, like Malabar spinach or even Tetragonia or something like that. But I haven't found a good market for those, and spinach is a crop I usually just rest until I start it again in mid-August. Anyway, that's me at the moment. What are you all up to right now, and in what region or ag hardiness zone? Some of you still have snow on the ground, so you're probably like, I'm not planting anything, dude. And then some of you are peak season. So, and then some of you are in the southern hemisphere and headed into winter. So why don't you all check in and let us know what you all are up to in your neck of the woods. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll discuss why Three Sisters is not a common gardening style for the modern market gardener. BRB.
Every day is a wonderful day. Who knows what we'll see? It could be anything. Oh, yeah.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op making living soils in Cleveland, Ohio using NOP-compliant food scrap compost. They wrote us, quote, "We're stoked to support Growers Daily because healthier, tastier, and generally more decent food systems start with growers like all of you, inquiring minds who care about the land." End quote. Love the folks over there at Tilth. If you're looking for top-notch compost or potting mix, drop an email to the folks at Tilth via info@tilthsoil.com. That's info@tilthsoil.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's SOW, and use my discount code NOTIL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. All right, enjoy the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions now. Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Nathan Leal Crisp, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I've seen a lot of talk about Three Sisters plantings or even 4 or more sisters cropping. I don't doubt that there is a way that these things can be done effectively, but I haven't seen much success with this type of planting in a market garden style environment with staple crops like corn, squash, etc. I know I'm speaking very generally, but how do you think this could be successful for the average market gardener, and what other crops would you like to see trialed in a system like this? What could that possibly look like?" End quote. Okay, so great question, Nathan, and thank you. Now, it should be said, I am not an Indigenous American, and so I am a bit reluctant to advise on using Indigenous methods that not only have huge cultural significance to those who developed them, but are often gravely misunderstood by gardeners today who just assume that the Three Sisters means planting squash, corn, and beans all together. Yes, sometimes that is what it means, but also there are many other elements, sometimes other crops involved, regionally adapted seeds, often rituals. It's just not that simple. To back up, these intercropping strategies, sometimes called Milpa among other terms, were developed differently for different regions. These are practices that are still used today, but speaking historically, pre-colonization, when much of this country's indigenous populations were able to grow food on large scales, it was not as simple as just beans, corn, and squash. In fact, depending on where the tribe was located, not all tribes interplanted, while others, utilized sunflowers, cotton, amaranth, sometimes trees, various weeds and herbs, as well as, or even in place of, other crops that we typically associate with Three Sisters. When and how each of the crops were sown was dependent not just on tradition and the rituals, but on the specific varieties that those groups used based on years of adaptation. Like maybe for some groups, it made sense to plant their specific beans, squash, and corn all together at the same time, while other groups found planting the beans or squash and or sunflowers, etc., that they had developed over the millennia, they'd found that that was more effective to plant later, given their varieties and climate. Some tribes in the Southwest developed bush habit varieties and didn't always plant them near the corn at all, so as to not compete for water. Then, of course, there were various spiritual rituals involved in the planting that were, and again still are, important to the production for these particular groups. Historically, these are practices that matter not only culturally, but for survival, and were developed over hundreds of years. So to the first point about why we don't see that many people succeeding at it, is that Three Sisters is just not that easy to replicate from a seed catalog and by just planting everything together. But it was, and still is to be sure, a successful means of production because it wasn't just an idea like, hey, let's plant beans and squash and corn together. They seem to get along. It was a highly refined and nuanced agricultural practice. It is really hard to overstate the amount of high-level agriculture that the colonists would have witnessed when they had first arrived, large agricultural fields that stretched on for miles and miles to sustain millions and millions of indigenous Americans. However, the colonists didn't always know what they were looking at, and much like the use of fire, didn't always appreciate what they were looking at because it didn't look like their gardens. It didn't look like the clean, sort of pristine European garden. But you can't produce that amount of food on that scale without knowing exactly what you're doing. So anyway, part of the reason we don't see a lot of this particular pairing in market garden settings is just that these intercropping strategies are complicated and take a lot of regional adaptation. The other reason is simply economic. Dried beans, types of corn, and winter squashes are pretty low on the list of crop profitability for market gardeners. These are all today considered, technically like a lower profit staple crops, with perhaps winter squash being the lone exception to crops that market gardeners will still mess around with on scale. But generally, those are three crops that not a lot of market gardeners are growing. And I want to be clear that I'm not denigrating people who care about the financial side of these things. Economics speak in many cases to land access. Most market gardeners' land is so limited, it is hard for them to justify the production of crops that don't earn a certain amount of money. Oftentimes, Three Sisters plantings were not planted as intensively, again, depending on the climate, the tribe, the variety, etc., as market gardeners generally plant. They used a lot of land because pre-colonization land was somewhat abundant and shared. Intercropping has a ton of potential to make lower profit crops like this more profitable or be a better use of space, but it has to be done right and done thoughtfully with a lot of practice. Successfully intercropping really requires a deep understanding of your climate and the varieties you're using. There's a good study of a few hundred milpa plots in Guatemala that showed that the corn did not yield significantly lower than conventional corn in the milpa system, and that the milpa system produced more food per square foot. Or, how the researchers put it, quote, the total caloric yield of milpa systems was consistently higher than that of the maize monocrop, providing more food energy per unit area than sol maize, end quote. So, Three Sisters is an undervalued but also misunderstood production method that I think people will occasionally try without really appreciating the complexity and nuance involved, which is why we don't see a lot of success with it. Anyway, I love that question, Nathan. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing what you all think or what your experiences have been. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, microgreens. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. Harnois Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Arnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at arnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. So microgreens, these were all the rage about a decade ago and frankly still have some great potential in the market. But I was thinking the other day about how many micros we used to grow on our farm and realizing just how much of that has changed for us in the last few years. So I figured I would talk about why it is that we don't grow microgreens anywhere near the level that we used to. First, I'm going to differentiate microgreens and shoots from sprouts here. Sprouts are just sprouts, meaning they are sprouted seeds, sold whole, not cut, and not grown in any sort of soil or growing medium. By microgreens and shoots, I'm referring to very, very baby plants, grown usually in trays of soil mix, and then they are cut when they are, just a few inches tall and sold in small packages of an ounce or so, usually at $10 or $20 per pound or more. So in a very basic sense, you can grow several $100s worth of microgreens in an incredibly small area, with each 10-inch by 20-inch standard microgreen tray being worth like $30 or more, minus a few dollars for soil mix and seed and labor and packaging per tray, which will come up later. If that's the case and you can get that amount per tray, that means that in about a 30 square foot space, you could produce $400 or more worth of product every couple or few weeks. And with grow lights, you could stack that production vertically. So you could have trays on trays on trays. That seems like a sweet deal. Hard to find anything that high value in farming, in fact, or that fast growing. So after many years of growing them, why did we stop? Or why did we slow down so much? Well, first thing is that the microgreen competition where we were, especially when we were in the farmer's market, was high enough that we couldn't always sell as much as we needed to produce to make it worth the effort of producing it. We had one or two vendors at every market that we went to for whom microgreens was kind of just like what they did, almost strictly microgreens, and they did it really, really well. So it was a bit of hard to compete with them, especially since those vendors came all year long and took the time to develop a relationship with their customers. Those customers came to us for things like carrots, but had their microgreen farmers. And when you don't sell the entire lot of microgreens, then the microgreens become a huge loss really quickly. Like I said, $3 or $4 a tray after labor and expenses, depending on the variety, that adds up quickly. Also, we didn't and still don't have a great microgreen setup. Growing microgreens in the same place we produce plant starts was fine in the spring, but in the summer, it was often too hot or too variable to get consistent production out of them. So we found it was easier to stop growing them through the peak of the summer and just grow them on the shoulder seasons. But that also meant in the middle of the summer, people were looking elsewhere for their microgreens. We would have had to invest in some better climate control, but without the clear market for them, or frankly, a passion for growing them, that felt like it might not be the best investment unless we were really going to go hard at them and try and take that market share, which we liked the microgreens growers, so we weren't particularly excited about that idea, and we're not super passionate about growing them, so we decided against it. And to be sure, if the market opened up, I would probably produce them again. I love the flavors and the colors, and they're a nice addition to a sandwich or salad. But for us, the numbers based on the labor and space they required, especially when they went to waste, didn't always add up. But I think if you don't have a lot of other microgrowers in your area, or you have a decent greenhouse production already and can work them into your production, or a space in your basement and you could put some grow lights, I say go for it. Especially the more forgiving shoots like pea shoots and sunflowers, those are an easy entry into the world of micros and can give you a sense of, is there a market for this? Is the market interested? Micros are incredibly fast to production, so especially in the early years, if you can develop a market, micros can give you cash flow in a way that other crops can't. Like you're talking 60 days to production for stuff that you also had to take, at least 90 days to prep those beds, whereas microgreens, if you had absolutely nothing right now to grow food with, you could probably have a batch of microgreens within 3 weeks. So it's a big difference. We used to even give like pea shoots and sunflower shoots in our CSA when we could see a gap coming up in a week or two. We could start them and then know in 2 or 3 weeks we could give that as something to maybe, if we had a lettuce failure or something. just to add something interesting to the selection that week. For a while, we even added a small amount of pea shoots. I think it was like 1 pound to every 10 pounds of lettuce mix, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that ratio. Anyway, we'd mix that all together and sell that as a specialty mix at market for a premium. So that worked out for a while, and we had a lot of people that would come looking for that, even like long after we stopped doing it. Pea shoots in particular are one you can actually grow in the ground. You don't need the trays. Roebuck Farm over there in New Zealand has done a lot of good development and content on producing pea shoots that way. So shouts to Jody. And as a bonus, it's great for the soil, having those pea shoots there. So you cut them a few times and then and then you get to kind of reap the benefits of having peas grow in there. So lots of potential. Anyway, do you grow any micros? Has it been a boom or bust crop for your farm and market? For yourself, for your family? Let us know. Otherwise, I think I'm going to wrap it there. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a 501c3. Donations are tax deductible, in other words, and greatly appreciated. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers, including our longtime editor, Michael Sellis, who does freelance editorial work for podcasts and etc. Learn more at sellissoundworks.co. I will link that in the show notes. Don't forget to sign up for the No-Till Growers Bracket Challenge, which you can also find in the show notes. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Awesome. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. Some big shout outs today to Beverly Chapel. Oh, Beverly's our only one. You get a solo today, Beverly. So this seems like a very obvious story of a psychology professor in Mississippi who randomly ends up in a class that, attending a class like a seminar about controlled burns. And anyway, Beverly decides to kind of study the effects of someone watching fire and the effects that has on your brain. And anyway, after the results of the research that Beverly does are published, and there's a really good response to it, Beverly decides to leave academia altogether and become a burn boss, recovering native savannas in the South. And also gets really big into salsa dancing on the weekends, because why not? I mean, it's good exercise and it's fun. I feel like that's a win-win. Fires all week, salsa on the weekends. That sounds like the life. All right, thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow.